it was just very interesting to find out where my barrack was that we had to live in.
This is Arlene Watkins, a volunteer interviewer for the Kizuna Project. It's February 15th, 2025, and I am in Tucson, Arizona with Carolyn Hanano Skinner. Carolyn, do we have permission to record this interview?
You do.
So let's start with a simple question just for the record. When and where were you born?
I was born in San Diego, California, 1940.
Let's start with your family. What can you tell me about your father?
My father immigrated from Japan, I believe when he was a teenager. And what I understand is that he took a freighter with his cousin and another friend. The freighter was from Japan to Mexico. And that's where they got off, and then they traveled up through Mexico and got to the Rio Grande River in New Mexico, and then crossed in the middle of the night, and his friends from the Los Angeles area was there. They were there to pick them up. And then they helped get him settled in San Diego, and where he became a landscaper. And then, and his cousin became a rancher, a farmer in San Diego also.
And what was his name?
His name was Rokuichi Frank Hanano.
And what about your mother?
My mother was born and raised in Los Angeles, the county of Los Angeles. Her parents came from Japan. And I think my grandmother was one of those picture brides. And so she came over after my grandfather had been in Los Angeles for a while. And they married and had 7 kids. And they lived on a farm, you know, where they grew produce and sold produce.
And I understand your family was sent to an assembly center and then to Heart Mountain Internment Camp. What can you tell me about your family's experience there?
I know that before, when they were notified to pack and be ready to be transported, they went up to Los Angeles. They were given permission to go up to Los Angeles so they could leave with my mother's family to wherever they were going to be interned. And so they left San Diego, went to LA, went to Santa Rita racetracks, and for a few months, and then while Heart Mountain was being built, the camp. In fact, my mother's youngest brother was Benny, and he was single and needed stuff to do. So what he did is he left Santa Ana racetracks and was a volunteer, and they trucked them over to Wyoming, and he helped build the internment camp.
And I understand your father almost didn't make it with you.
My father, because he was not a citizen, was arrested and taken to a camp, and he was going to be deported back to Japan, which I never could understand how they were going to do that when we were at war with Japan. But anyway, his clients in San Diego all wrote letters to the government stating that they did not have to worry about him being a spy, you know, or there to sabotage the United States. And so because of the letters, they let him go so that he could join my mother and the family. And then he went with us to Heart Mountain.
So can you tell me a little bit about your personal experience there, and also you had a brother that joined you?
Yes, I was only a year and a half when I got there. So I grew up, 3, 4 years there. But as a child, I had a wonderful time, and there were a lot of other children there. And because as children, you adjust to any situation that you're in. It's probably harder for those older than myself, but my recollection was the mess hall, the bathroom, the barracks that we were put in. We got there just before the hardest winter that Wyoming ever had. And so being from California, we didn't have the clothing to wear during the winter season. And I remember the snow coming through the cracks and underneath the flooring, and it was pretty cold. Yeah, really very cold. And then then during the summers, it was hot and windy, lots of wind and dust, and those would come through the cracks too of the barracks. But the Japanese, people, they put newspaper in the cracks as much as they could, or rags or material. And then each barrack had a cold burning stove inside. And I just remember my father working in the kitchen at the mess hall. He would help some with the gardening, just anything to keep busy. And my mother, of course, was just, trying to get the barracks, turn it into some type of a home for myself and my father. There was Obon. I remember there was Boy Scout troops. It was really, and they had classes to entertain the young people, the young kids. And there was Obon. Eventually they started having Obon every year, and there were church services. There was Christian and there was Buddhist. It was a fun time for me.
And your brother was born there?
My brother was born, I think, a year before we left camp. Yeah.
And you have been back to Heart Mountain 3 times in the last 20 years. Why did you keep going back, and what have you learned about it?
Because I just wanted to learn more of what the camp life was for the adults and even the older children. And I wanted to see the hospital, where I remember going and having my tonsils taken out. And my mother had my brother there, and I remember my father taking me. I couldn't go in the hospital, but she would meet us at the window, and showed me the baby, my brother. And so there's part of the hospital is still there. The chimney is there from the laundry room. It was just very interesting to find out where my barrack was that we had to live in. I have a couple of the guard towers there now, and they're bringing in as many barracks as they can back to the interpretive center there that they're building. And I knew that I had heard that there were root cellars. Never knew there was a root cellar there. But they found a couple of them, and they were restoring one of them. One was too far gone. The lumber that they had used had deteriorated, and it was too dangerous, to go in. But the one that was left, they were able to stabilize and brought in the same type of wood that was used previously.
Have you spoken to other people about their experiences in the camp?
Yes, the last time I was there, which was last summer, they had groups of us. They were out of all, what was there, how many were in that camp? Oh, was it 10,000, 12,000? Only 44 of us were there for the pilgrimage, yeah. And a lot of them were older than I, and they were not very happy with their experience there. And all I could tell was good things when I took part in the discussion. And but I learned that, a lot of them are the same as books that I have read, stories. that they just lost everything. And when they went back, there was nothing for them to go back to, really. Yeah.
What about your family? When they went back, what was their life like? And did they ever talk about their experience in the camp?
No, they unfortunately never would talk about it. My grandparents went back to the LA area and were able to lease land to farm. And my father and mother, we went back down to San Diego, and he picked up being a landscaper, and my mother was just a housewife. But it was a great childhood for me, and they never spoke of camp life. My cousins, I had 12 cousins, and we just never really, and just 3 of us had the camp experience, the oldest 3. So the others were all, they didn't know anything about it, and we never talked about it.
Why do you think that's the case?
I don't know. And even I grew up in San Diego with close friends, and they all went to Poston, but we never talked about camp life. And I don't know why. Maybe because we never heard of the adults talking about it. But my mother would never talk about it. And of course my father didn't, because he didn't speak English. And but I've always wondered why my friends and I never talked about and compared, notes of what we experienced. But then we were all like a year and a half,
right?
When we got there. And a lot of my cousins don't remember anything.
When you returned, what was your school life like when you went back?
It was difficult as far as I think for my parents, because they were only allowed to rent a place in the Logan Heights area in San Diego, which was the black and Hispanic community. And because there was so much prejudice at the time because of the war. And I believe at that time too, I'm not sure, I shouldn't say, but I don't think that they could own any property yet. They could lease or rent, but they could never own property. And but we were in San Diego there in Logan Heights. I went to the Buddhist church, and my parents were active there. And then we were there until my 6th grade, and then my mother was able to find a home in Chula Vista. And there we had a 2-story little house, and it was like happy days, to me, that community. But there were Japanese farmers in the outside of Chula Vista, and it was just a great childhood for me. My mother made sure that we were happy and we had what we needed.
And were there other Japanese families in the school?
There were maybe five of us in this whole school. And but even like the black community, there were maybe 3, black students in our school. But I never had to experience any racial slurs or any type of bias, towards, because I was Japanese. Once I got to Chula Vista, it was different in Logan Heights. We would hear the words that we hate. And but Chula Vista was different. We were more accepted. Yeah.
And tell me a little bit about your husband, how you met and what kind of person he was. I met him in middle school, at junior high, and but we never were friends. We were both in student council. And then he went on to high school, and then we didn't meet up again until he was a junior and I was a sophomore.
I knew his father better than I knew him. His father was music director of the school district, and I was in the orchestra, so I knew of Harlan Skinner, my father-in-law, and which I loved him. He was just a wonderful man. But then I got together with his son, and then we dated for a couple of years. And then he went away to San Diego State and lived on campus. And then I got a scholarship to go to San Diego State on a nursing scholarship. And but then he got a baseball scholarship to another little college in Point Loma. And but unfortunately, my father decided that I didn't need to be dating a Hakujin anymore, or a Caucasian. And so for about 6 months, you know, there was a lot of sneaking out to meet him. And my mother found out. This is all personal, but my mother found out, and so my husband said, you know, let's just elope. Let's just go to Yuma and get married. That's what we did. And so we got married, and then I became pregnant, and we started having kids. And he quit school, went to work, and then his job, he was working his way up, and we ended up in Phoenix, and started having, you know, more children, and ended up with 5. But we've been here in Tucson. We were here for 60 years. And loved it here in Tucson, yeah.
You've been a dedicated volunteer for a number of organizations since retiring, including Casalitas and Tucson Samaritans. Tell me about that.
It's just, I needed to do something, but I didn't know what. And I had heard there was this organization when I was still at home with kids. This was in the 80s, and but I couldn't take part in doing any volunteer. But after my husband died and I started looking around to volunteer, I came across this gal who was going to be a speaker down at the University of Arizona, and she was a representative of the Tucson Samaritans. So I knew that was the group I wanted to get involved with. And then our pastor at the church I was attending at the time said that Casalitas was looking for volunteers. And I had a real good friend who went through Red Hatters with me. And when we were done with that, she and I were looking for something to do. And so we went with the pastor and started working for Casalitas, and helping the migrants as the Border Patrol was bringing them across after they'd been processed. So from there, we were at an empty grade school, and then we went to a house on Campbell by the Blue Willow restaurant, and it was an empty house, and they were having migrant 4-bedroom house. And so we were working there, cooking, washing, changing beds, because they were brought in by the Border Patrol. They were staying there maybe no more than 2 nights, and then they'd have a sponsor. And so then we would get the bus ticket or the plane ticket from their sponsor, and then they would take them and send them off on their way. And so we did that at the house, and then it was moved to a monastery. And then from the monastery, we ended up at the Juvenile Detention Center, where the county gave us 3 wings of the juvenile center to use. And so we were there altogether 15 years. We worked with Casalitas. And but last November, we had to give it up, and because they were closing down the facilities.
What about the Tucson Samaritans?
The Samaritans I'm still working with, yeah. What they do is they leave gallons of water out in the desert, and then 5-gallon tubs of granola bars, applesauce, things for nourishment, you know, that they could take the water or any of the food that they would need. Yeah, and they're all across the Sonora Desert. You know, they just plant them, and they've done this since the 80s. And so that's the one that we're still working with.
Well, both of them are migrants
Yes.
organizations. Can you tell me how that affects you?
I think for me, I try to think of that as like my dad as a migrant coming over, you know, for a better life. And what he went through was nothing compared to what these people today are having to go through. And I think it's just something in me that I need to, I don't know how to really explain it. These are people that need help of any kind, and there's so much going against them and what they've had to put themselves through to get here. And then they have to wait to be processed. And then a lot of them, that's why a lot of them cross the desert illegally, because they can't wait around for months trying to do it the proper way or the legal way. And so they take their chances to go across the desert during the summer, the winter, whenever. So I just try to do my little part in helping, you know, maybe just a small amount of people compared to what really is coming across or was coming across the border. And but that's all we can do, is do what we can and hope that it helps someone. Yeah.
Well, Carolyn, thank you for speaking with us today. And this is the end of the interview.
Well, thank you very much.